I want to talk tonight about the Torah portion a little bit and explain how the Torah works and how Judaism works. How much time do you have? No. All right. Just briefly. There's a concept of a mitzvah called chok and mishpat. There are two words that mean the same thing. It's usually translated in English as laws and precepts. And if you read through any English translation of the Torah, you'll get to it where the translation of chukim and mishpatim are laws and precepts. And if you could explain the difference between a law and a precept are in terms of the Torah, it would be amazing, because there is no difference. But the two words in Hebrew are totally different. A mishpat are laws that we can understand, that are understandable to the human mind. And according to the Midrash, when God gave these laws to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, they said, we would have done that anyway. That's obvious to us. Do not kill, do not steal, right? Compliment the rabbi. These are things that, I forget what verse that last one is, but these are things that are obvious. But then there are chukim. Laws that if God had never told us that we needed to do them, we would never have dreamed of doing them. And even now that we know about them, we still don't understand why we're supposed to do them. Those are the chukim. And the par excellence, chok, is the name of this week's Torah portion, chukat, which is the story of what is known as the para aduma. Now you may not know those words in Hebrew, but you may have heard in English, they're usually translated as the red heifer. Now, what is the red heifer? The red heifer, well, it's a heifer that's red. So, my son has been learning ad nauseum facts about NBA players. And there's a player who plays for Milwaukee who's known as the Greek Freak. And my son came down and he said, I want to tell you about, his name is Giannis Antetokounmpo. He said, he starts telling me about his height, his weight, how many assists he have, how many rebounds, on and on. And he said, do you know anything about him? I said, I know two things. You really what? Said, he's Greek and he's a freak. That was it. So that was that conversation. I forget why I told you that. So the paraduma, the red heifer, oh yeah, it's red and it's a heifer, but there's a purpose to it. The purpose is that if you become impure in Judaism, there are a variety of ways the Torah describes you can become impure. You go to the mikveh, the ritual bath, and you're pure. But there's one thing that the mikveh doesn't help, that you're still impure. You could go all the livelong day to the mikveh, it won't help. And that is if you come in contact with a dead body. If you come in contact with a dead body, instead of going to the mikveh, you've got to find a red heifer. There weren't that many. You got to bring it to, thank you. You got to bring it to Jerusalem, sacrifice it, burn it, take the ashes, mix the ashes with water, dump them over your head. In that case, you are then purified from coming into contact with the dead body. You don't even have to touch the dead body. Just being in a cemetery, just being in a hospital where there's a morgue, even if you're on the top floor and the morgue's in the basement, you're impure. And so you got to go searching for a red heifer. Don't do that now. We don't do this anymore. There's no holy temple. But the law, so God said to the Jewish people, do not kill. Okay. Do not steal. Okay. The red heifer in case of impurity. Okay. Wait, what? They had no idea what he was talking about. And the way that we learn it in this week's Torah portion, if you read through chapter 19 of Numbers, you see that it's explained in very legalese language from Moses to the Jewish people about what you're supposed to do. Which is a little strange. Because the one way that Jewish law differs from any other law code is that it's supposed to be infused with divinity. It's not supposed to be man-made. And if it's infused with divinity, there's got to be a purpose more than just keeping order in a society, but there's got to be a more moral reason for performing this particular law or mitzvah. Now, Reform and Orthodox Jews look at this differently. You know, in Reform Judaism, we try to find the very scientific nature of everything in the Torah. You know, where I went to rabbinical school, the Hebrew Union College. So I show up there, day one. Hebrew Union College, here I am. I kind of know what Hebrew Union College means. Hebrew has something to do with being Jewish. It's a college. I mean, it's not a college, but it's a college, I guess. Union just sounds good. In Hebrew, it's called Hamachon Lemadai Yahadut, the Institute for the Scientific Study of Judaism. Not an exact translation. And I got it, and I said, the Institute for what? First of all, I hated science, that's why I'm here, because I wasn't good at the science. But in Judaism, we need to find out the very scientific reason for doing the mitzvah, and when we do, we often lose sight of the spiritual essence of it. Orthodoxy has an issue too. Orthodoxy is so interested in following the laws that it sometimes misses out on the spirit of the law as well. And there are plenty of examples of both. But what happens in Chukat in this week's Torah portion is very intense. And the midrash that explains it is chilling. In chapter 19, Moses goes through this very long explanation of how to kill the red heifer, how to offer it as a sacrifice, how to mix the ashes with water, how to dump it, and how to become pure. And if you don't do it right, you're cut off from the Jewish people. It's all legalese. There's not a lot of compassion. There's not a lot of counseling. It's here's the law, don't do it wrong. Now, chapter 20 then begins. Chapter 20 begins, and the Torah stops on a dime and goes away from this type of legalese to tell us that right then and there, Miriam dies. Out of nowhere, Miriam just dies. And what happens when Miriam dies is that the water dries up. The Torah tells us that once Miriam dies, there's no more water, which is an indication that it was because of the merit of Miriam that a miracle happened, and that there was always water in the wilderness, in these places where there are no wells, there are no springs. But because of Miriam, God provided water, and when she died, it dried up for a little while. So here's the scene. The next thing that happens, by the way, do you know what the Israelites tend to do when there's not enough water? Complain. We're Orthodox when it comes to that. We're all very good at that. It's a joke. It's a joke. But they complain. So here's the scene. And it's explained in the Midrash, a Midrash called Yalkut Shimoni. Moses and Aaron bury Miriam, their sister. They're devastated. They are mourning. They're sitting Shiva. And they're by themselves. In the Torah, what happens is Miriam dies, the water dries up, the people complain. Okay. But the Midrash explains it with a little more detail and says Moses and Aaron are doing what you'd expect them to do. They're sitting Shiva. And all of a sudden, all the people start coming towards them. And Aaron turns to Moses and says, isn't this wonderful? They're all coming to pay a Shiva call. They had big plates of Joanna's and the black and white cookies, right? And they're all coming. And as they come closer, and Moses and Aaron are, ready to receive them and feel their consolation, the people have anger in their eyes. And Moses and Aaron realize they're not coming to console us at all. They're coming to yell at us. Aren't they going to give us any grace period? Don't they see we're sitting Shiva? Don't they know our sister just died? And they're coming, not even to say we're sorry that your sister died. Give us water. It's intense. But in order to understand how the Jews could be so cold and lacking compassion, we need to understand what has just happened. How did the last Torah portion end? What happened in Korach? What happened was the 38 years of wandering are just about over. Now, you know the Jews were not supposed to wander in the wilderness. The Jews were supposed to go to Egypt, go to Sinai, get the Torah, and go right to Israel. But then we had this horrible sin of the spies, and God said, okay, you are all going to die in the wilderness, and your children are going to enter into the land of Israel. You might not have thought about it this way, but what were those 40 years wandering in the wilderness like? There were funerals every single day. It was 38 years of death. It was 38 years of parents dying while their children were still young, because that generation needed to die off so that this newborn generation born in the wilderness could enter into the land of Israel. It was 40 years of young children losing their parents early. That's what it was. So they knew a little bit about death. They knew a little bit about burying their loved ones. And Moses and Aaron are teaching now at the beginning of chapter 19 about death, and they do it in a legalese type way that shows no compassion to a group of people who've all lost their parents in the last few years. And so these people have been taught Torah in a way that lacks compassion. And when they see that Moses and Aaron are suffering because Miriam has died, they know from the Torah that they've learned, you don't have to have compassion. You just need to make sure you pour the ashes the right way. You just need to make sure you sacrifice the animal the right way. That's how you get kicked out of the people of Israel. The compassion, that's not so important. There's once a story, one of the stories from the Talmud you probably know. Have you ever heard the story where this guy wants to convert to Judaism, so he comes to Hillel and he says, convert me while I stand on one foot. So what he's really saying is, I want you to convert me and teach me the whole Torah. The one foot is the Torah. The other foot is the Talmud. He says, that foot I'm not interested in. That's what the one foot is. The one foot is teach me the Torah, but not the Talmud. So what does he say? What does Hillel say to him? Love your neighbor as yourself. The rest is commentary. Great. The Torah says, love your neighbor as yourself. He walks out. He says, this is great. I need to love her as my neighbor as myself. Wait, what do I do? So he goes back and he says to Hillel, what do I do? And Hillel says, oh, the definition of that's in the Talmud. So then he tells him, here's all the things you need to do. But he tells them in a way that first he explained the spirit of the law. He didn't first say, listen, you got to call people 3 times a week, you got to check on them, you got to bring food to this. He didn't tell them all the legalese of what you needed to do. He used the words, love your neighbor as yourself, words that have endured. If you don't know anything about the Torah, you probably at least have heard that phrase. Only later on did he teach him the legalese of what it means to fulfill a mitzvah with all of your heart. The Israelites saw this red heifer as strange. They saw it as a weird custom that didn't bring any consolation to their mourning. They weren't taught about the processes of mourning, that they should have been in the way that they should have been. If they had, they would have responded a lot more appropriately to Moses and Aaron in their hour of suffering. But if we are, as Reformed Jews, willing to look at each mitzvah, not as some weird custom that we don't understand, but as an opportunity to recognize that the Torah was given in a way that no other law in the history of the world has been given, as an opportunity to connect to the divine, then we can, by doing any mitzvah, bring goodness, fairness, equality, friendship, justice, and peace into this world. We might then have a better chance of transcending the legalese of the Torah and then entering the realm of the spiritually fulfilled. The Reformed Jew who rejects any mitzvah as old-fashioned, as outdated, is not really a Reformed Jew. Reformed Jew, what I think it means, Hamachon L'Ma'aday Yahadut, the Institute for the Scientific of Study of Torah. We didn't do any labs or scientific experiments in rabbinic school. What we did was we looked at each mitzvah and tried to figure out how can we connect in our world today to these words from the Torah in meaningful ways. And if we can figure it out, then when we go out to our congregations, we can teach our members how to be spiritually fulfilled. This was what the Para Aduma, the strange, weird mitzvah, was meant to do. Keni Hiratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.